Every day you lower your status, quietly, automatically, and you call it being normal. You react, you explain, you respond when someone pokes, questions, or doubts you, and in that moment something subtle happens. You signal that you can be moved. Power doesn't announce itself. Status isn't demanded. It's inferred from behavior, especially under pressure. The person who reacts is assumed to be beneath the person who doesn't. Not because of confidence, not because of dominance, but because reactivity looks like negotiation. And negotiation looks like weakness. Most people never see this happening. They think they're defending themselves, clarifying, being reasonable. What they're really doing is telling the room exactly where they stand, lower than they think. And the worst part? Once people sense they can provoke a response from you, they never stop trying. Being subtly disrespected. It rarely starts with open disrespect. No one insults you directly. No one challenges you openly. It's quieter than that. A comment that slightly dismisses what you say. A joke that lands just a little too close. A question that isn't really a question. It's a test. You feel it immediately. Something tightens in your chest. Your mind starts racing. You want to clarify what you meant. You want to correct the tone. You want to explain yourself so you're not misunderstood. So you speak. You add context. You justify your decision. You defend your position calmly. At least that's what you tell yourself. But the room doesn't shift in your favor. It shifts away from you. Because subtle disrespect doesn't disappear when you explain. It sharpens. The more you talk, the more you look like someone asking to be understood, instead of someone who assumes understanding is already there. This is how authority erodes, not through failure, but through reaction. People don't lose respect for you because you're wrong. They lose respect because you seem affected. They notice how quickly you move to fill silence, how fast you respond to skepticism, how eager you are to smooth things over, and without realizing it, you train people. You train them to question you, to push a little harder next time, to see how much pressure it takes before you explain again. What makes this painful is that you feel reasonable, you feel controlled, you feel mature, but socially you're signaling the opposite. Those who hold status don't rush to be clear. They don't hurry to defend their choices. They don't scramble to correct perception. They let ambiguity sit. And when you don't, when you rush to remove discomfort, you place yourself beneath the person creating it. That's the quiet humiliation most people live with. Not being attacked, not being rejected, being tested, and answering every time. Here's the shift most people never make. Status doesn't come from being understood. It comes from being unmoved. In any social situation, there is always an invisible hierarchy forming, not based on titles, not based on intelligence, but on who controls themselves under pressure. One person applies force, a remark, a doubt, a challenge. The other person reacts. That reaction is the giveaway, because the moment you feel compelled to respond, you've accepted the frame. You've agreed that clarification is owed, that your position is unstable until you explain it. The Stoic, sees this differently. Restraint is not passivity, it's selection. When you don't react immediately, something subtle happens in the room. The pressure, it has nowhere to land. The imbalance reverses. Silence stretches. Eyes wait. The person who initiated the test feels it first. Not anger, uncertainty. Because now they're the one exposed. They've shown intent. And you haven't given them anything to work with. This is the moment power flips. Not through dominance, not through confrontation, through absence. The less reactive person is assumed to have options, assumed to be secure, assumed to be higher in the hierarchy because they don't need to prove anything. This is why really calm restraint unsettles people more than aggression. Aggression reveals investment. Restraint suggests surplus, and humans are instinctively drawn to surplus. When you stop explaining yourself, people start filling in the gaps. They project competence, they project confidence, they project authority, not because you demanded it, because you didn't chase it. Stoicism isn't about moral superiority. It's about strategic positioning. You don't win by overpowering others. You win by denying them leverage, and leverage only exists when you react. Once you see this, you can't unsee it. Every unnecessary word becomes a concession. Every emotional response becomes a signal. The Stoic doesn't rise by climbing. He rises by refusing to descend. There is one rule that governs all of this. Non-reaction. Not silence as a tactic, not avoidance, not pretending you don't care. Discipline. The refusal to respond emotionally, verbally or defensively when you're provoked, questioned or tested. Most people misunderstand this rule because they think reaction is automatic. That speaking up is strength. That correcting disrespect preserves dignity. It doesn't. Reaction is compliance. The moment you react, you accept the other person's timing, their frame, their pressure. Non-reaction breaks that contract. It says, without saying anything, you don't set the tempo here. This is why most people can't do it. Non-reaction creates internal discomfort first. Your ego wants relief, your mind wants closure, your body wants to release tension through words. So you talk, and in doing so, you trade short-term relief for long-term loss of status. The Stoic makes the opposite trade. He absorbs the discomfort. He lets the silence exist. He allows the other person to sit with their own provocation. This isn't about being cold. It's about not volunteering information, emotion, or validation when none is required. Non-reaction doesn't mean you never speak. It means you don't speak on demand. You respond when there is purpose, when timing favors you, when words add weight, not noise. Socially, this discipline is rare, and rarity creates value. People begin to sense that you operate on a different axis, that you are not easily pulled into explanations or emotional loops. They feel it before they understand it. Because non-reaction removes access. No emotional entry point, no verbal leverage, no easy way to test you. And when people can't access you, they adjust their behavior. They speak more carefully. They test less. They assume more. That's the quiet authority this rule creates. Not through intimidation, through control. Control of the only thing that ever truly belonged to you, your response. Social situations are never neutral. There is always pressure moving in one direction. Someone pushes, someone probes, someone applies subtle force. A look, a comment, a question meant to tilt the balance. Most people respond automatically. They try to equalize the moment. That's where they lose. Non-reaction creates asymmetry. One person is working, the other is still. One is invested in an outcome, the other isn't revealing anything. And, well, asymmetry is power. The person applying pressure is exposed. They've shown intent. They want something: compliance, reassurance, dominance, information. The non-reactive person gives them none of it. This immediately shifts the dynamic. Pressure only works when it meets resistance or compliance. When it meets nothing, it collapses inward. Silence doesn't argue. Calm doesn't negotiate. Stillness doesn't validate. So the person seeking control feels it slip. They talk more. They over-explain. They escalate or retreat. Either way, they lose composure first. That's the social reality most people miss. Power isn't who speaks better. It's who stays centered while the other person destabilizes. Non-reaction forces the other person to reveal themselves, their impatience, their insecurity, their need to dominate. And once revealed, their leverage is gone. Meanwhile, the non-reactive person appears solid, grounded, untouched, not because they're superior, but because they're disciplined. Humans read this instinctively. We trust people who don't rush. We defer to people who aren't easily shaken. We attribute authority to those who don't scramble for control. That's why non-reaction works even when nothing is said. The situation reorganizes itself around the calmest presence. One person tries to control the room, the other controls themselves. And in every hierarchy, social, professional, psychological, the second position always sits higher. Not loudly, but unmistakably. In real life, non-reaction doesn't look dramatic. It looks uneventful, and that's why it works. In conversation, when someone challenges you, the instinct is to correct them immediately, to restate your point, to prove you're right. Non-reaction means you pause. You let the challenge land and pass. You don't rush to fix their misunderstanding. You allow space. Often they clarify themselves, or soften their tone, or move on. Because the absence of resistance unsettles them more than argument ever could. In social settings, tests come disguised as humor, a joke at your expense, a sideways comment meant to measure how sensitive you are. The reactive person laughs too hard or defends themselves. The non-reactive person gives nothing, no forced smile, no explanation, no visible irritation. The moment passes, and something registers. This person isn't easy to toy with. At work, non-reaction becomes leverage. When a colleague questions your decision in front of others, you don't justify it immediately. You listen, you nod, you respond later, privately, briefly, on your terms. The room notices, not what you said, but when you chose to speak. That timing signals authority more than any explanation ever could. The hardest moments are when silence feels risky. When you worry, people will think you're weak, or unprepared, or wrong. But reacting out of fear always costs more than waiting. Non-reaction doesn't mean inaction. It means delayed action. You choose the moment. You choose the setting. You choose the words, or the absence of them. And over time, people adapt. They stop pressing. They stop testing. They stop expecting access to your emotions because they've learned something important. You don't move when pushed. You move when you decide. That's how quiet dominance looks in practice. Status doesn't rise because you choose the right words. It rises when people stop expecting words from you at all. When they realize pressure doesn't change your posture. That doubt doesn't speed you up. That provocation doesn't pull a reaction out of you. At that point, something settles. People adjust their tone. They simplify their questions. They think twice before testing you again. Not because you demanded respect, but because they sense limits. The world doesn't elevate those who explain themselves clearly. It elevates those who remain steady when explanation would be easier. You don't need to dominate the room. You don't need to win exchanges. You just need one thing: to be immovable. Once people realize they can't shift you, they stop trying. And whatever status you were chasing before quietly takes its place behind you.